stuff there.
All right, welcome everybody. This is the third Wednesday of the month. That means it's office hours, our monthly live stream where we go live on the air on YouTube with an esteemed panel of experts that you see here, and we answer as many Kubernetes questions for you as possible. We are going to be in #office-hours on the Kubernetes Slack. If you go to slack.kubernetes.io, just follow the form there and go into the #office-hours channel. If you're joining us from the Kubernetes users channel, welcome. Feel free to just pop questions. What we do is we queue them up and we go through them as quickly as possible. Let's do some quick intros first to our esteemed panel. Keep in mind this panel is volunteer only, so if you've done a really great project on Kubernetes or you've amassed some expertise, sitting on this panel is a great way to really contribute back to the community. It's not a big commitment. It's 1 hour a month, and we have enough people where we can rotate around. So if you feel like sitting on the panel and helping out people in this kind of format, then we would love to have you. Please PM me. If you are watching the Slack channel, please let us know how the stream is sounding and looking. And with that, let's do some intros, panel.
Hi, my name is Bob Killen. I am a research cloud administrator for the University of Michigan. I've been working with Kubernetes for quite a while, and sort of my specialty is on-prem deployments and other things like federation.
Hi, I'm Joel Speed. I work for Pusher, a company in London. I work on their Kubernetes platform. I've been building a lot of custom controllers recently, spending a lot of time in the KubeBuilder channel, done a lot of stuff around auth and stuff in the past as well.
Hi, I'm Priya Bassi from Giant Swarm. I'm mainly working in security and deployments on Azure, AWS, and on-prem. Lately, I've been designing lots of operators and architecture on that.
Hi, I'm Matt Farina. I work at Samsung SDS. I'm one of the Helm maintainers, and I chair SIG apps for Kubernetes. I spend most of my time working in the app space and things related to that.
Awesome, great. And I'm George Castro. I am the community manager at Heptio, soon to be VMware, and I will be your host coordinator for this evening, aka I will be reading the questions to the panel. Some quick rules before we get started. First of all, thanks for joining. Feel free to chat in the channel. We will be live streaming the channel along with the video, so feel free to talk amongst yourselves, paste links, and so on. If we do address your question today, please just submit your question. You will be automatically entered in a raffle to win this wonderful Kubernetes t-shirt, so you too can look like Tim Hawking. We give away a t-shirt every time we do a session, and it's a lot of fun. With that, the quick ground rules. This is a judgment-free zone, so people will be asking beginner questions, people will be asking complex questions. So remember, everyone had to start from somewhere, so please be supportive of everybody and your buddy. Remember that we do follow the code of conduct, as this is a Kubernetes project event. We will do our best to answer your questions, but the panel doesn't have access to your cluster. So, like, if you're expecting Matt to like SSH in your control plane and fix stuff, we can't really do that. So live debugging is off topic. So what we will concentrate on is do our best to give you the next step on what you need to do next to get the information that you would need to live debug something. Panelists, you're encouraged to expand on your answers with your experiences and pro tips and anything beyond the usual, just answering a question. The reason we love you is because of your expertise with this stuff in production. So any insight that you have there is always welcome. Audience, you can help us out by pasting in URLs to the official docs, blogs. Usually while one of the panelists is answering a question, they'll mention something, and then people go out, they'll go Google through the problem that we're talking about and whack a whole bunch of URLs in the chat. That is very useful, very recommended. We like to collect those up and stick them in the thread afterwards. Bob is going to go ahead and post the question thread into chat right now. That's kind of where we're collecting the text if you already have like a link to a Stack Overflow question or something. And what we do is we shove all the notes into that thread so you have them there. You can also help us out by tweeting, spreading the word, pay it forward. We do our best to try to help people as we can. So thanks everyone for joining. Remember, each of these sessions is recorded and available on YouTube. And especially if you're using this as a work resource, as like a team thing, we have this vision that people at work during lunch are sitting down and watching office hours. If there's any information that you feel would help make this a better resource for your team that's using Kubernetes for something useful, we would love to know about it. And as usual, if you want to sit in this panel, all these people are volunteers and they're taking the time, and their employers let them take the time to help users out. So the more feedback you give us, the better. And when you do join, you do get a fabulous, fabulous Kubernetes water bottle, which I have yet to give these folks. But hey, I did remember to wear the right Kubernetes shirt today. So with that, audience, are you ready? Feel free to type into chat, and then we will get started. All right, the first one comes from Cigar, who actually PM'd this question to me. He says, does the Minikube version 3.30 support Docker version 18.09.0? I was trying to install Minikube on my Ubuntu virtual machine, but it says it doesn't support Docker version 18.09.0. So this is, I'm going to expand on his question here a little bit for the panel. What is the deal with Docker versions and the stuff that I need to run Kubernetes, right? Because the client-side tools and stuff is obviously revving at Docker's pace. But then again, we use those tools in Kubernetes. So how do I guess part of my general question to add to his is how do I not cross the streams here and keep a sane setup here? Because Kubernetes usually does not support the latest version of Docker, correct?
Correct. I don't think they even support the latest stable one officially.
Yeah, I think usually there is a few versions that are tested and stable. Usually newer versions should work, especially with the most recent versions. I guess if you switch to Containerd implementation, then that should be the best. That said, Minikube, you would, I guess you're using no VM driver, because otherwise it comes with its own version of Docker. So if you're using a VM for Minikube, like KVM, or I think on Ubuntu, that's pretty much what you would use. Then it would spawn its own Docker in the VM and use that, so you don't have a dependency on your system's Docker client or daemon.
So I just checked in the docs, and they recommend 1806 at the moment. I have no idea what the latest stable version is, though.
I think that's it, actually. I know up until recently it was like 1709 or 1706.
Yeah, I find myself, I save myself a lot of headache by using the Docker that comes with Kubernetes. So like using even on my laptop, I don't install like kubelet and stuff. I have the repo with Docker in it. So I'm using the exact Docker on my laptop. This is different, especially on Ubuntu. This is different than the version of Docker that you get from the Docker repo, different from the version that ships in distro, and different from the version that Canonical supports on snaps. So that's like 5 different versions of Docker. I find myself, since I'm mostly using it in a Kubernetes context, I just use, like there's usually not like a feature that I need very badly in the latest version of Docker. I'm happy with what Kubernetes gives me, which is a little bit older. But yeah, there's version skew there. I don't really know a solution other than paying attention to that, and it's a thing you have to deal with. All right, any other comments on Minikube and Docker versions?
Just one, actually. The Minikube default is 1806 currently, 1806.1.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to do your own thing, you can, adjust the build file and sort of roll your own ISO.
Mm-hmm. Would you want to use Minikube with a version newer than what Kubernetes supports? See, that's where it starts to get weird, I think. So something to think about.
There's always a risk involved, kind of.
Yeah.
I've
also seen where like it just works and everyone's like, okay, moving on. But like even though, Matt.
The one thing to think about is Kubernetes goes through a lot of testing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And testing in certain situations. And so if you try to go off the beaten path by changing Docker versions and things like that, just realize that what you're going at is really untested at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the onus on you going that way, saying, okay, I'm going to go off the beaten path. I personally just go with whatever is there because I'm relying on Kubernetes more than I am on Docker. It really is just simple infrastructure. It just needs to run the basic things, and then it's through the Kubernetes interface. And maybe it's because I'm not doing anything too fancy because I like portability. And by not doing anything too fancy, it ensures portability, at least at that layer.
Yep. Okay, moving on. Jim CM asks, hi, I'd like to submit a question for office hours. I'm a newbie's Kubernetes user. Welcome. Having a problem getting Kubernetes up and running on my single node cluster. Problem description is here, and I'm going to go ahead and whack that URL in chat again, just to have it there on the live stream. I followed that debugging steps at the docs, which is the debug application troubleshooting page, which I will also paste into the chat. But that didn't solve my problems. My question is, what are suggested next steps for debugging? E.g., how to turn on additional tracing/logging, how to snoop traffic on the pod network, etc.
Give everyone a minute to actually read the Stack Overflow question.
Yeah. No worries. While that's happening, just a reminder, those of you following along on the live stream in Slack, there is about a 10-second delay. So we do our best to try to kind of deal with that. Let me remove all these logos from the chat because we don't need them. And then Aaron would like to remind everybody, the latest stable Docker is 18.09, which is currently not supported in Kubernetes. And that Docker has now moved to a 6-month release schedule. That is something I didn't know. I don't know how it lines up with the Kubernetes release schedule, but it sounds like they would start to line up at some point.
The core DNS issue looks a bit like a networking issue because it's basically it cannot connect to the master.
Mm-hmm.
and that's where it needs to connect to get its service discovery from.
Mm-hmm.
However, was it a single node cluster? Single node cluster, because then a single node cluster shouldn't have networking issues in, say, it is self-hosted, so it's pod network.
Yeah, the one thing that I saw is like, it looks like QBDM was used, but they're using a service to reference it instead of just using the host's IP, because isn't like the API server and all that just being directly exposed on the host?
You wouldn't typically, well, no, you should run core DNS on host networking as well, so that it doesn't try and DNS itself. If that's not set up for host networking, then it would try and use the internal service, at which point, yeah, it's not going to work. So if it's on host networking, it needs to use the, well, I guess local host at that point to try and talk to the API server to get that list.
However, there should be a service IP, which is the first one, usually 1096.0.1, that points to the host name or the host IP of the API server. Why that is not working? Now today, Ilya is not here. Otherwise, he might help with the Weave networking that they're using.
Mm-hmm. I
Haven't
think we
used
could.
Weave in a long time.
I've just noticed that the port that the service is exposing and the one that Core DNS is trying to get to aren't actually the same. I think Core DNS is trying to go to port 443, but the service, and it does have port 443. Never mind, sorry. Target port is 6443. Yeah, not sure. I would avoid using the service if possible.
Then,
yeah,
of course,
you could bootstrap Core DNS to talk to the API server directly and not using the service.
That's what I would do. Like, as far as I know, that's generally the default, because like I'm looking at my own QBDM provision cluster, and there's no like Kubernetes API server service.
Mm-hmm. And with that, I'll take a note also to just pass along the Stack Overflow question to the folks at Weave.
Okay.
That's always useful. Just a reminder to everybody, if you do put your question on Stack Overflow, it's really useful because we can continue to improve it and then pass it along to somebody as opposed to asking to someone to fast forward 15 minutes into this video and try to answer it. So we will send some Weave folks that way as we can. Okay, any other comments on this one before we move on? Those of you on the live stream, keep on asking them. We're just adding them to the queue and getting through them as fast as we can. All right, Simon asks, question for Matt during office hours. We are using Ansible for most of the things we do. We've been seeing some issues and read more when it comes to the Helm module for Ansible. Do you see that module recommended for production or is it deprecated? If we shouldn't use the module, how do you recommend using Helm with Ansible? Thanks.
So this is, I'm going to be terrible at answering this because I don't use Ansible. So the Helm community doesn't officially support this. It's more supported by the Ansible community. So this is not a Helm project or something like this. And so it's not something that I'm all that familiar with since I'm not an Ansible user and I don't do this. According to the documentation, it's listed over there as community maintained. And so I actually don't know what state it's in. Maybe somebody else here can. It may be production ready. It may not. I actually don't have a good answer. I'm sorry.
Yeah, like I wonder, you can't just pay Red Hat and they'll support a Helm module, right?
Yeah,
Well, is that what they mean by community maintained, or is it like part of a suite?
Well, what I think is they're talking about is Ansible has a Helm module that's not Helm, it's part of the Ansible community that can then use Helm, and you can tell, using your normal Ansible scripts, here's where your charts are, here's what you want to install, here's what you're going to do, and then Ansible will then call Helm to do that stuff and knows what to do, and it's over there. And so it may work, it may be production ready. I'm actually just not sure.
Darren's actually chimed up in chat. PyHelm seems to have problems with Python 2.7. We don't use it because of this.
Okay.
So I know
Ansible
Ansible's
just directly use the Helm client in Ansible. So just use the CLI and bind that into your Ansible like you would without the CLIs, maybe.
Yeah. I know Ansible itself has been going through a big rework to essentially migrate and support Python 3.x.
Yep, I see several people typing furiously, so we'll give them a second. While you're typing, and when we do get to your question, feel free to post a follow-up or just keep on typing with clarifications in the chat. We will constantly monitor it for you. Darren says, I have a pattern for using Helm and Ansible. Just getting it now. Thanks a lot, Darren. And that is Darren Gruber. Thank you. All right. Looks like Darren's posting in a whole bunch of good stuff. Let's give them some time to have it develop.
Just a quick thing. If you're going to be pasting like a lot of code, if you could like start a thread, doesn't like completely clog up the chat.
Yeah, that's a nice small one though.
Yeah.
That's really great. Good looking out, Darren. Darren, I'm going to send you a spare shirt just because. Let me write that down because that's what I like to see. I love to see people helping each other. See, look at that, Matt. Someone helped you out. You didn't even know the answer to the question. That's really awesome. All right. Thanks for that, Darren. Moving on. Brian asks, question, I've used managed clusters and local single node clusters. Now I want a 3-node cluster primarily targeted at kubeflow/appdev. What is the suggested path of least resistance? Is CentOS 7 VMs with master mem size 8192, vCPUs 8, slaves half of that? Configure with KubeSpray a good path. Thanks for having office hours. I kind of have a strong opinion on this one, but I'll let everyone else go first.
Personally, I would have said you need less than that for the masters. So I've just checked our production instances and we're running 2 vCPUs and 4 gig of mem. So and we're not just running the Kubernetes stuff on there. Like we have got some custom controllers and stuff running on there as well. And we've not had any problems with that sort of size.
Yeah, especially CPUs doesn't need to be very high. I think recommendation for below 10 nodes is 2 + 4. I think above 10 or 10 to 15 or 10 to 20 would be 2 CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM. I wouldn't go with too small memory on the workers, but that depends basically on what you're running. Not sure. I've never used KubeSpray. Any experiences with that? I kind of default to recommending kubeadm recently.
Yeah, KubeSpray consumes kubeadmin these days, so I think it's
pretty much the same.
Yeah,
good.
Pretty much. I mean, if you like the convenience stuff, I really enjoy. I wish I had the time to kind of document this better and say cluster lifecycle is the single node experience for kubeadmin is like really good now. And then like if you want to add stuff, another node, it's just like one command to add it, after you kind of set up the single node thing. But Simon would like to add kubeadmin is still experimental in KubeSpray.
Do you want to talk about the cluster API quick and some of the evolution of that?
I do not have the technical background to talk about cluster API.
Okay.
And I think it's a bit early, although I guess KubeSpray will be one of the first projects are supported there, or is already on the way, kind of.
Is Antoine still doing KubeSpray? Let me look.
I believe so.
Yeah. I know the upstream author is really great. That's like
for those not in the inner circle of Cluster API, maybe Cluster API, the goal of it would be kind of being able to say kubectl or cluster.ctl, cluster create with the YAML file as the configuration and just get a cluster.
Yeah.
That's kind of the goal behind that, but I guess we're still not really far on that yet.
I know it's a lot of the work's being spun out to like the specific vendors too. Like there's the like vSphere provider, the OpenStack provider. I actually think Samsung was the one that was working on the like bare metal SSH provider.
Yeah, and there's different solutions that are moving towards Cluster API. I think SAP Gartner and also us as Giant Swarm, we're moving our own APIs, which are basically already that way, to be more conform with Cluster API.
Yep. And that kind of tells me a reminder I'll take a note. We should really have Chris Nova on for one of these to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Cluster.
There is a demo. I think she recorded a demo.
Yeah. And she's on the West Coast. Let me see if I can try to snag her for today's West Coast presentation.
Was there a TGIK on it?
I think that was just a community demo. Yeah.
She did it in the work group, in the cluster API work group.
Okay. That means
I think I have a link to it on YouTube.
Yeah. Whack that in the channel when you do, and then we'll move on. So but CentOS 7 VMs, that seems to be work fine. But okay, moving on. Benji asks, could you guys describe why Federation version 1 has been stopped and how Federation version 2 is different, better? Bob, your favorite.
Yep. I'm just going to grab a link quick and drop it in here so you get a nice reference. Okay. So the TLDR on this is that the Federation v1 sort of tried to fake the standard Kubernetes API. And that actually wound up having a lot of limitations and was really hard to maintain because they had to rev it essentially with every release of Kubernetes, and you had to go through all sorts of crazy stuff with ensuring, all your sort of federated members are at the same version. And now with Federation v2, they've gone to a CRD-based system where you have sort of federated deployment or federated config map. And in that, you have a template, which essentially is the deployment or config map or whatever. And they don't necessarily have to have that template completely adhered to everything. And you can now add other sort of information to it, like how you actually want weight how it's being deployed to specific clusters. They've added a lot more information to it, and it just makes it a lot easier to sort of sustain going forward. It also enables the there's a lot of demand for a pull-based reconciler instead of push-based, which is what Federation v1 uses. So now instead of having to expose all the clusters necessarily out to the internet, you could have an agent running in the cluster that would sync with the federated API server instead. And this sort of just enables that sort of deployment method.
All right, Benji, if that answers your question and you're on the stream, feel free to ask a follow-up. We're watching the chat there. And then just some more feedback here on the kubeadmin with kubespray bit. Simon would like to say in version 2.7.0, it's experimental, but the experimental tag seems to be removed from master. So some homework on our part, as it sounds like it's gone production. Remember that kubeadmin is also going GA this cycle in a few days-ish. So that might be related. So we should definitely look that up. All right, moving on. Anand Singh Kunwar asks, anyone know a way to get a secret in environment variables in a stateful set where each secret/key pair corresponds to one of the ordinal indices of that pod?
Yeah, this is a tough one here. I haven't done this, but the only thing that I can come up with is if you expose everything via the secret, and then there's actually a method, and I think this has landed and I'm going to paste a link into Slack here that tells you how you can get how you can get in an environment variable within your pod the number for your stateful set. You can get your index. And if you use this and then you have all of the information available from the secret available, such as in another environment variable as an array, you can go look it up then because you have the two pieces of information. That's the bit that I haven't done this, but that's the way that I would probably start approaching it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would definitely work. If you have a security issue of not wanting to have all the secrets shared between your pods, then you might need to write an actual controller for this. But usually you shouldn't have that kind of issue, I don't think. I mean, they should be talking to each other anyway. Stateful set.
Yeah.
Hates Crypto kind of has a follow-up. So before we change gears, I'm going to there. Speaking of environments, is there a reason why some pods in the same namespace see other pod environments? Are those coming from secrets? And then Anand has a follow-up.
Wow, that's a good question. Can you use an init container to create an environment variable? I don't know the answer, but I'm guessing it's no, because it is a separate container shell. And so to actually inject that, it's different. Somebody may know some trick around it, but I don't think you can.
Mm-hmm.
The one sort of way that I know about doing that sort of thing is to essentially have like a shared empty dir, and it then dumps it to a file, and you sort of load it as like not necessarily the entry point, but you load it when the other one starts.
Yeah, so instead of an environment variable, you're using volume shared to pass the information.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It looks like people are responding to Kate's Crypto's questions. I just want to repeat this for the stream here. Speaking of environments, is there a reason why some pods in the same namespace see other pod environments? Are these coming from secrets? And Rafi, sorry, don't know how to pronounce it, says it's auto-generated by the kubelet. It sees neighboring service in the namespace. It's not their secrets or environment you are seeing. And I see nods from the panel-ish. So thanks for that.
If you're actually seeing environment variables that shouldn't be seen there, I would file a bug, because that sounds pretty much like a bug to me.
Mm-hmm. And then there's a link to the Discovering Services documentation there that he has plopped. Thank you for that information. Always appreciated. All right. I see people typing, so we'll wait for the follow-up. We'll move on to the next one. Jim Angel asks, welcome again, Jim. Hey, Matt, looking for an elevator pitch of what's coming in Helm 3, ETA, any major roadblocks. How can we help?
Wow. So what's coming in Helm 3? The quick pitch here.
Yep.
Tiller is going away. And so those of you who've had to do things like multiple tillers and stuff like that, all of that's gone. The Helm client is able to handle everything. In fact, that's already there. We have, let's see, charts. We'll have a whole bunch of additions and changes to them. For example, you can have a library chart. So you share bits and reuse them. We're going to have Lua in there, it looks like. And the choice of Lua actually has to do when you get into security and embedding it and cross-platform and the ability to easily do that. It's the popular language that pops out for those things. And so we're looking at embedding Lua into this. And so you could have Lua in your charts that do extensions, because we do have people who want to do quite crazy things. It may surprise some people, but you can OpenStack into Kubernetes with Helm, and there's crazy things in there for that. So that's one of the big things. We are focused on cross-platform because we do have a bunch of different platforms. We're going to be updating to use things such as CRDs and secrets for Helm storing its own information. One of the neat things that we could probably use some help with is we would like to do something like JSON schematize the values file and the possible things in there. That'll allow auto-generating forms for UIs. That'll allow validating stuff. And the Go ability to do that with JSON schema looks like it might be immature. And so that's one of the risks, I would say, is that particular one, because just that space in Go of working with some of these things, it looks like it could use some work. We're still poking around at it, but that's something we haven't done yet. Doc, that I'll share in the chat here, a couple of things there. And on Helm, we do have a project where we are keeping track of V3 and what's going on here. And I'll drop that in.
Yep. And while he's pasting in links, feel free. I see people typing in the chat. Feel free to just ask your Helm what's coming in Helm 3 questions now before we move on, since we have Matt here.
Yeah, and so you can see what has happened. Some things may change here. One of the conversations that has recently started is whether, instead of going to something like a repos v2 index, which was there for performance, do we migrate to, is there a way to use container repositories to store charts? And there are some folks now talking about, is that a possibility that we could layer in? And so that one is at risk just because it would become overcome by a different solution. We're going to have things like push and login for servers so we can support more stuff there. But you can see what's up and what's being worked on. Some of you may have seen the Azure Go Lua project that hit Hacker News and some of these other things in the last week that was actually released very early, specifically to start embedding Lua into Helm. So that's some of the stuff, but you can poke over here and see what's going on and what's been done in the project.
Yeah, that's awesome. This seems like rewrite, probably the wrong word, but it seems like this is a very significant,
Helm, we take semantic versioning very seriously because we know that people operate production workloads with it. We've got numbers on downloads and stuff just from stable charts, and they're mind-blowing, right? Like in a month, over 40,000 unique IPs will just pull from stable. That's a big number, and that doesn't include all of the private stuff people. And so we take stability and APIs really seriously. And so Helm 3 is an opportunity to update to a bunch of Kubernetes things that have happened. And at the same time, it's an opportunity to say, we've learned a lot of lessons. We've interviewed people, we've learned problems. We've seen things that when Helm 2 was being created, they thought would be a good idea, like Helm serve and being able to serve an HTTP chart from your local system. We have yet to find a person who's ever really used this, right?
Oh, interesting.
And so we've learned a lot along the way, and this lets us finally break the API to make improvements. Now, for most people, your Helm charts will still continue to work. So you'll be able to bring forward your existing charts for I would say 99% of people will have that, unless you're using some of the really crazy features that you don't ever see anybody even using on GitHub anywhere. So we do want to bring folks forward, but this is an opportunity to break things.
Yeah, and just a quick follow-up question there. For people using the 2 having not read all the links you said, is there a support path going forward for that? Is it what's the transition look like? Give me like the 2-sentence snippet.
To go from Helm 2 to Helm 3?
Yeah.
I don't know yet. For most folks, you can get rid of Tiller and you can install Helm, but beyond that, we haven't really figured that out. We want the charts for almost everybody to be able to continue to move forward. That's a big, strong thing. And the old repos just to be able to pull from and deploy things. As far as migration path and that kind of thing, we haven't worked that out yet.
Okay, and we do have a follow-up here. I'm just going to ask Darren's a quick question here while we're talking about Helm. We use Chart Museum for hosting our Helms. Is there any way to force overwrite of a chart with the same version? We use the push plugin for Helm, and I'm not sure that this functionality exists.
I don't know the answer to this one. I haven't done that. We tend to go for, just like with our container images, we like immutable charts. And so that way, every version, it's different, and then you can trace it from environment to environment. So we don't tend to do that because we want that immutability. And if you're pushing the same version up with different content, then it's not immutable. You're mutating it. And now you may not know what version of what thing you had running in different environments. So as a general rule, we recommend you not do that. I haven't tried this with Chart Museum, so I don't know.
Yeah, Darren asks, is bad practice to overwrite? Totally agreed. There's probably a situation there. Keep on typing, Darren. Maybe we can help out or link you up with a Chart Museum person. Okay, keep on asking the questions in chat, everybody. Those of you tuning in, this is the Kubernetes Office Hours. Join us at the little address below and ask your question about Kubernetes, and then we will get to it. Moving on through the queue. That variable, yes. Simon, second question, can I use Istio as network policy between pods? I want to limit what services a pod can access. I'm able to do it using service entry for egress traffic, but not sure about inter-pod communication.
You can do it for interpod, but it won't be network policy on the layer 3 and 4. It will be on layer 7 or 5 to 7, I would say, somewhere. So it should be used together with network policy. And I know that people like Tigera from Calico, they've kind of advocated for using both together. And I think there's even some designs for application level policies that would kind of be a single level of policy that you define that then gets implemented by both the CNI and Istio. And especially if you have a CNI like Cilium that goes from level 3 to 7 and might even support Kafka policies. So who implements the policy and who defines it, like where you define it, are a bit complicated and not always kind of very clear to define in your setup. With just running Istio without network policies, you will be still able to reach the pods for a network if you go around the MTLS of Istio.
Yep. And Rafi says most well-used CNIs like KubeRouter and Weave has full network policy support. Thank you. And then let's see. Oh, I actually missed a question for Darren, so I'm going to get to that one next. Any other comments on this network policy? Thanks for the ping, Darren. And Matt's also answering Darren's question of why he needed to redeploy the same version. Matt's recommending that you could just deploy your chart from the local file system if you're doing development, so that you can just rev quickly. All right, real quick, we have a quick survey question. Darren wants to know, what are some of the must-have applications you have to use to help manage / interact with your clusters? Just to give you an example, he likes Stern for tailing logs from multiple containers, and telepresence.io for joining Kubernetes network to your local machine. Seems like everybody loves telepresence. I haven't had anybody complain about it. It's like one of those things where everyone's like, this is really great. So that's good. Any other tips, questions? Do we have a thread on this, Bob?
I thought we had one.
Yeah.
It's like the best tools. I mean, there's some command line tools like kubectx, kubeps1, kubeNS to like switch around networks, contacts, namespaces.
That's a lifesaver for me.
Right?
Which
one? Work with a lot of
kubectx, because like I have like 20 clusters or 20 contacts, so just being able to quickly switch between them, especially when you start working in a federation, when you have a whole slew of clusters that you're working with.
Yeah. Let's do this. Bob, after we move on from the next Kubernetes question, I know we started a kubectl tips and tricks thread.
I'll get that
awesome
quick.
Stuff. It would be great to have like associated cool tools that you can put on top of your cluster. And try to get that from that. So we actually have on the forums, there's this great thread on kubectl tips and tricks. We should definitely have one for tools like telepresence, Stern. I do want to mention, before we move on to the next federation question, that someone mentioned, Polaru mentioned, I work at booking.com on the topic of federation. They've got a tool called Shipper, which I thought looked pretty cool. So we should definitely check that out.
Yeah.
If you are listening, I'd love to see this at the community demo, I think.
Yeah, we had it demoed at SIG-APPS a while ago. Let's see. Oh, it's continued development. Okay. Yeah. We did a while ago. This would be a good one to have at the community meeting.
Yeah. Polaru, ping me in Slack off. Just DM me, and then we'll get you scheduled sometime in January to do a demo if you want for the community meeting. I think that'd be cool. Awesome.
One of the tools that I like here, by the way, is Draft from the Microsoft folks. And the thing that I like about it in particular is using it with a debugger, right? Because there are times where I'm running stuff locally that, okay, it works, and then I stick it in a container and I stick it in a cluster, and I use a Mac, right? So different OS, different environment, and being able to actually debug inside of Kubernetes, that's kind of a neat thing. And I know there's a couple other tools that let you do something similar, but that's the one that comes to mind right now if you need a debugger for code.
Yeah.
So you can actually step through the code.
Awesome. And those of you listening, if you have great tools like this, just start whacking them in. We'll create that discuss thread, and then
there's also something a bit more simple than telepresence. I think kube FWD, so kube forward, which basically forwards all services of a single namespace to your local host. So you can just combine your local with that, and then deploy and just work on your machine against that cluster.
Okay. Kate's Crypto asks, what's it called? Can you repeat the debugger? So you were talking about Draft, which comes from the Microsoft folks. Does that come with a debugger, or is that a separate thing you enable?
It comes with it. At least last I
Okay.
looked. The version that I have, it's built into it.
Let me just look up
And
Draft.
they actually walk through, let's see.
Here it is, Azure/Draft. I got you.
Yeah. And it's part of it. It's actually a tool. It'll work with your Helm charts, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's designed to help you get moving on this stuff.
That is good to know.
Also, VS Code integration with Kubernetes is awesome.
Yes. Another handy tool that I actually started using recently, KubeScore, which sort of does code analysis of your like object definitions, make sure you're not using latest, and sort of enforces like other, well, gives you suggestions for
Like
other
an
best
audit
practices.
tool.
Yep.
Yeah.
KubeScore. All right.
We've run that for customers to give them like a first impression of what they should do. Like,
yeah, it's what we usually get. Like the people that have just started getting to like use Kubernetes and start writing stuff for it, they're going from Docker to it. It's just like, here, this sort of helps you over that little bit of hump to start using best practices.
Yeah. All right. So what we'll do is we'll move on to the next Federation question, because I want you to answer that one, Bob. And then I want to make sure we grab all these tools and start sticking them in a thread, because I didn't even know about KubeScore. This is why we do these. We can all learn something. All right. Those of you listening, keep on sticking cool tools and stuff in the thread, and we'll just, or in the chat, we'll keep on mentioning them. Okay. Moving on. Benji asks, follow up about the Federation version 2 question. I installed a Federation with KubeFed 2, but unlike 1, there's no context for the Federation itself. Will this be implemented in the future?
No, there really isn't a plan for that. It's really the namespace and the stuff that where you deploy your, the CRDs for everything. All your work, at least in the current version of it, is going to be in that sort of, not necessarily specific namespace, but specific cluster, and then you can sort of define how things get propagated out from there. When things, as far as like the pull-based reconciler and some of that stuff, it'll just be however other people want to implement it.
All right, Benji, I hope that answers your question. Feel free to keep on typing. We have 2 questions in the queue, so we probably have room for 2 more questions. Keep on asking them. If not, usually people stick around after the show and answer them. And of course, we have a session in about 6 hours from now. So if we don't get to you, we will definitely try to get to you this afternoon. Mark would like to ask, question, I'm really wondering what the best course of action is to orchestrate global Kubernetes clusters. We have a global presence, and managing cluster by cluster seems fine for a few clusters, but not for 20 plus global clusters. Any ideas? With global presence, we mean multiple isolated clusters in several AWS regions. This is the question, isn't it?
I would say that that's exactly why people are going towards Cluster API and similar tools. I mean, there is a few tools out there that can manage more clusters. Right? I think Gardener, Rancher, Giant Swarm, all kinds of different tools. However, something upstream will hopefully be emerging with Cluster API. Until then, basically, you need to write your own if you don't want to go with any of the projects out there, either open source or paid.
Matt, Joel, or Bob, any opinions on this?
I mean, this is a space that I think is still open for a mature product. And I think the Kubernetes project to try to get there is Cluster API. And I'm not sure of its state. I think it's still very alpha software.
Yep.
It is not what, at least in Kubernetes, what we would call beta, which is where many of us run beta as production. I don't know that it's ready for that yet, but it's probably the most likely thing to get there soon. But there are, like somebody said, Rancher. There are a couple of things that are trying to do this now.
And I guess from experience, I can just recommend be very hard with your versioning, version everything. Try to really like stick to configurations and keep them in Git or somewhere. Like stick to immutability. Don't do anything manual on your clusters. Keep it everything immutable. Reapply. Don't kind of run scripting around. Just be very strict in that sense. So you don't diverge from your configurations in clusters, and you don't get to pet clusters, but you have basically cattle clusters that you can throw away.
All right. Any other comments on this? Okay, moving on to Edward T. I actually skipped your question. Sorry about that, but thanks for letting me know. Asks, hi, what is your internet traffic into a bare metal cluster? Currently using Keep Alive D, virtual IP pointing to an ingress controller, node put service. Is there a better way to do this?
First, I would opt for Metal LB. It's sort of a better version of the Keep Alive D, like load balancer, service type load balancer provider. But in general, you sort of have it right. The way we've done this in a couple ways is we might have a set of ingress nodes, and they sort of bridge between the like internal cluster and sort of the internet. And I know a couple others have actually like just put all their nodes sort of on the internet, and we'll like have Metal be running all, like on all the nodes specifically, or on all the nodes. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
You do have to be careful about your firewall rules and things like that with that, though.
Okay. All right, moving on, because now we are tick-talking. Edward, I hope that answers your question. Feel free to post a follow-up. Simon asks, question, how are you handling ID tokens with -- token equals? We're using PowerShell where it extracts the token manually. I'm not going to read that, but I will. Do you guys see the question on the chat? Scroll up a little.
Yeah, I've already replied to that one.
Awesome. Can
Looks,
you give us a quick summary then?
Yeah, so it looks like ADFS supports OpenID Connect. So what I would suggest you should do, like if you've got an OpenID Connect set up already for your ADFS, there are tools out there that he's already using IIDC, great. We've got an example of our authentication using IIDC that basically configures kubeconfig for you. So if you've got OIDC set up and you're happy to use refreshing, once you've got that set up in your kubeconfig, it'll actually just continuously refresh and you don't need to log in every time. So yeah, check out the example, K-itself example thing that I linked. That might help you out.
Exactly. If your ADFS is new enough to support OIDC, you should go with the refresh token route. Otherwise, if you have an Azure AD sync set up for your ADFS, you could also use the Azure auth provider in kubectl that is using device auth for Azure, which is even easier to set up because it gives you an URL. You go to the URL, do your device setup, and then it works. All a bit about how your ADFS is set up internally. We had issues where ADFS would only work on Windows browsers, for example. There is some configuration stuff, but I guess your support staff at Microsoft can help you out there too.
And then Simon says, thanks, that's awesome, thank you. If you have any follow-up. And then Joel has posted in a link to an article about your CLI SSO at Pusher. Joel, can you actually post that in the main channel as well, and not just the thread?
Yeah,
so we have it
of
there?
course.
That would be great. Thank you. All right. Any other comments on this one? Sweet. Thanks for your question, Simon. Appreciate you participating. Snow Crash would like to ask, I've been struggling with this problem. It's a pod warning failing scheduling default, and then a link to a Stack Overflow question, which we will pop into the chat. Did you guys read these this one ahead of time, or do we need a second to?
Gonna need a sec.
Oh, yep. Actually, I've posted it twice. Snowcrash, just give us a second here to digest this. Whew, good amount of questions. Running out of time. This is great. I appreciate everyone participating. This is a lot of fun for us.
Looks like the cluster setup is quite borked. The kubelet cannot authenticate to the masters, so you basically have no nodes at all.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no CNI defined. So you have actually two problems. You have one problem where authentication or TLS between components is not working, and another where you have no CNI set up in your cluster. There is some Terraform code. It's a very custom setup, it seems.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that stuff at all.
Yeah. Is it EKS?
Yeah, this one looks very cluster.
Yeah, because I think it's It's an EKS setup. So maybe Ilya knows more. He writes EKS-CTL, which is basically a command line tool that automates creation of EKS clusters. So maybe we ping him and he can help out there.
Hey, Bob, we had two questions. We had a question on cops and one on Kate's Lego that I think got cut out. Was that you or me?
That was me. Those are from Kubernetes users. I didn't think we'd actually get to them.
Okay, all right. No worries. We'll continue with the live questions for people that are here then. All right, so it looks like this is more of a problem. This is a more serious problem than what the initial error says. So I don't know if we can help on this one. Let's finish up and then we can get back to this one. Maybe follow up on chat, see if we can link Snow Crash up with the right folks. Sorry about that, Snow Crash. This one looks pretty hairy. But let's move on and then we'll wrap up. Yeah.
I just found in the docs some stuff about the authentication that it looks like shows you how to get the nodes authorized. So I'll just paste a link for that.
That would be great. Thank you. All right. Nosford asks, and we got time for maybe one or two more questions. If you want to ask, queue them up in the chat. That'd be. Nosford asks, first, do you think that there's an issue in having replicas defined in the YAML? The use cases that we've seen is that we do redeploys by using the whole file. This might be wrong or bad. Any and all replica changes that are occurred will then be resetted to the default in the file if a replica set is defined. If yes or no, please explain how you would do it.
If you're not using HPA, which is a horizontal pod autoscaler, then it's totally okay to, and you should actually, in my opinion, set replicas in the file, because you shouldn't do changes by just running kubectl scale or something. You should always do something immutable, keep it in Git, keep it in the YAML, and then apply it to the cluster. That is, if you're not auto-scaling. If you auto-scale, you should have the auto-scaling configuration in YAML and reapply that when you change it.
Yeah, I think the big thing here is to don't do something that doesn't have a record and traceability to it. So if you had to, if something broke and you had to come back to it, you want to have backups. You want to have this recorded somewhere. And that's one of the things I can come up with, like kube control scale, is, oh, I scaled it. Now somebody who works somewhere else in the org or somewhere else doesn't know that you scaled it and what happens. There's no traceable record to this. And so it's a good idea to keep track of everything.
Yeah, you might be fighting it against each other. We had that with clusters sometimes. Like someone in an organization scaled a cluster, and then the next morning someone scaled it down again because they didn't know. They thought it's a mistake, and then fights occur, let's say.
Darren has a follow-up to this question. In relation to the immutability and scaling, if you were to use the node autoscaler, how do you reflect that in the Git repo?
Usually your auto-scaling stuff won't necessarily be reflected in the, Git repo directly. And you do set this up for like the horizontal pod autoscaler and some of the other stuff. But as far as like the total replicas, that won't necessarily be in there.
Yeah, and for the node autoscaler, like the cluster autoscaler, I mean, you would still have some configuration that you keep in Git. So you don't have the current number, but you have the desired range.
Right.
Yeah. So if you had to rebuild it, your scaling config, your auto scaling config would be the same, and so it could then in that environment scale to the right number.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep. And I see people typing, so we'll give them a second for follow-up. Let me just check here. I got some examples from Snow Crash that he's pasting in. That looks like Joel's doing with that. And then Darren's replying. Great. Thank you. This answers my question. No worries, Darren. With that, we're going to wrap it up real quick. We're going to have another session in 6 hours. Sorry, those of you, I accidentally skipped some questions. Normally we have Jeff doing the questions. So Bob and I are confused and pacing over each other, but that's okay. We'll get over it. With that, thank you very much for joining us. Let's just do a quick outro. Thanks to the following companies for supporting the community with developer volunteers. Panel here, supported by Giant Swarm, Heptio, StockX, Packet.net, Pusher.com, Red Hat, Samsung SDS, Weaveworks, VMware, Zing, Huawei, and the University of Michigan. Good luck this weekend. Special thanks to Google for sponsoring the T-shirt giveaway. So give me. Are we all set for the? I totally forgot about the T-shirt raffle.
Oh, I have not been managing that.
Yep, sorry. Give us a second, and we'll do the T-shirt raffle. So the number, Bob, is going to be 1.
Yeah, this might take a minute because we got some repeat people.
5, 6. Yeah, give us a second. Stand by. You can only win the shirt if you're listening, so you can't just bail on us and with the shirt. With that, we do certainly have some follow-up stuff that we will be posting to the channel, and we'll be posting the links and stuff into the discuss thread. We will. What was I going to say? Oh, we will definitely start that new thread that I wanted on cool tools that people are using on their clusters, because I feel like we could probably go on all day with a bunch of stuff once we get enough people into the room. We are waiting for the raffle here. Sorry about that. We are totally unprepared. I should have been.
This might take a little bit longer.
All right.
We could follow up in Slack if we have to go out.
Okay. All right, let's do that. So hang out in Slack, everybody, and we will just announce the winner in Slack here in a few minutes. It won't be longer than 5 minutes, and then you will win your shirt. Thanks, everybody, for participating. As always, third Wednesday of every month. Please pay it forward. If this has been useful for you, please let us know. And thank you, everybody. Anything else from the panel? You guys, any final thoughts? And I guess not. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll probably not next month, right? Because that's going to be right smack in the middle of the holidays. I'll make sure that is clear through all of our communications channels, and we'll see everybody in January. Thank you.